Hi, thank you everyone to be there. Thank you for coming. And welcome here in that beautiful church to talk about spyware. That's quite the first time I think we do speak about that in such a place. Welcome everyone. My name is Laurent Richard. I'm the founder and the executive director of Forbidden Stories. Forbidden Stories is a network of investigative reporters whose mission is to continue the work of assassinated, under threat, and jailed reporters. I'm very honored to be moderating this conversation with you three actually, because Agnès is joining online. Very happy to moderate this conversation about a spyware that we know well at Forbidden Stories. Some of you might remember that, but in 21 we were coordinating a project called the Pegasus Project and revealing the misuse on a global scale of that spyware against many people in the world. We did that in coordination with 16 news organizations, plus with the crucial support of Amnesty International Security Lab, who was with us on this project. Before starting our discussion, let me introduce you to our unique panelists. Karine Kaniba, you are a resilient survivor of Rwanda 1994 genocide, where your father, Paul Rusesabagina, saved over 1,200 lives in his hotel, a story later told in the film Hotel Rwanda. In August 2020, your father was kidnapped by the secret services of Rwanda and then detained in Rwanda on charges of terrorism and other crimes. And Karine, then you led the Free Rusesabagina campaign, shedding the light on your father's detention, and you were fighting until his release in 2023, after 2.5 years in jail. And you currently serve as a spokesperson of the World Liberty Congress and remain an active advocate for justice, human rights, and global liberties, even though your commitment has come at a very personal cost, as you were a target of the Pegasus spyware. Thanks for being with us. We'll come back to you in a minute. Galina Timchenko, very happy to see you here. That's the first time I meet you. You are the co-founder, the CEO, and the publisher of Meduza, the largest remaining independent Russian news outlet published in Russian and in English, and Meduza continues to reach millions of people inside Russia, despite having to operate from abroad. You live in exile. And in April 21, the Russian authorities named Meduza as a foreign agent. And since the very beginning of the Russia full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Meduza strongly opposed Putin politics, and the Russian government began blocking Meduza website. In January 23, the Kremlin banned Meduza altogether, declaring the outlet an illegal and undesirable organization. You have been living in exile, and you are still living in exile in Latvia, and a few months ago, in September 23, you discovered that the Pegasus spyware had also targeted your phone. We'll come back to it in a minute. Thanks for being with us. Agnès Calamard, I don't know if you can see her and if you are with us. I think you are. Hello, Agnès. Very happy to see you. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to Agnès, for those who don't know Agnès Calamard. Agnès Calamard is the Secretary General at Amnesty International and who has been a prominent figure in the human rights world for decades. In 2016, you were appointed as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings. Along with your UN work, you have also been the Director of Global Freedom of Expression at Columbia University in New York. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Let's start with you, Karine. I remember during the Pegasus Project, so the beginning of the investigation was a leak that with Amnesty and Forbidden Stories, we were having access to a list of phone numbers of potential targets of the spyware called Pegasus. And amongst those phone numbers, there were your phone number, Karine. And could you tell us how, on your hand, did you learn about that, and can you describe that very moment when you learned that your phone was infected?
Yes, so in 2021, January of 2021, I was contacted by Hannes Munzinger, who's a journalist from Germany. And he sent me a message and said, I'd like to look at your phone to conduct an analysis on your phone. And it was at the time where my father had been in prison in Rwanda. He had been kidnapped 4 months before. And as soon as he was kidnapped, he arrived in Rwanda, he was being tortured and charged with terrorism, completely fabricated charges of terrorism. And that was after having been lured to Rwanda by secret agents of the government of Rwanda. So when I was contacted by Hennes and said, hey, I'd like to look at your phone, I immediately thought, could this be another agent of the regime?
That's suspicious.
Yeah. And he told me on top of this, he said, don't tell anyone. And so I was already on edge, and I thought, let me put this aside and continue to advocate for my father's release. A few weeks later, he contacted me again, and he said, we have suspicions that you are being spied on, that you've been targeted. And so I told him, I don't know that I can trust you. I know the regime utilizes people who are not necessarily Rwandans to come after us, and so I did not know, I wasn't comfortable with it. And he said, I'll come to Belgium, I'll come see you, and we can meet. Just don't have anyone else at the house. And again, I was like, okay, could this be another kidnapping plot that's about to start? And so eventually he came to my home, and I had, of course, a family member, so I wasn't on my own, I felt safe. And he told me, can you put all other devices in a microwave or in a little pouch that he brought with him so that we could have this conversation in private. And apparently this serves to stop potential spyware from listening to our conversations. And so he went through the project and the work that Forbidden Stories was doing, and then we looked at my phone, and he said, well, that's what I thought. You were being spied on. And I was immediately shocked. And just the fact that potentially the only people that could be targeting me is the government of Rwanda, because I was advocating for my father publicly. And so I thought, they've already come after my father. He was probably being spied on before being kidnapped, and I thought maybe they're coming after me next. And so I put my phone down, and I was afraid to even touch it or look at it again, because I thought maybe they're just following me everywhere. But it was a shock to come to that conclusion.
It was a shock, and were you afraid of, because the Pegasus spyware is able to get everything, basically, your password, your photo, your video, any kind of message, even encrypted message that might be on your Signal or WhatsApp. What were you the most afraid? Was about your relatives, your privacy, your fight for justice, for getting the release of your father?
So I use my phone every day, as many of us do, and my phone was the main tool that I used to fight for my father's release. I used it to contact government officials around the world, looking for support to put pressure on the government of Rwanda so that they could release him. I used my phone to tweet almost every second. I was tweeting something about my father or tweeting at any official to get their attention. And I use it to connect with my lawyers, my father's lawyers, who were working really hard to get him home. And the fact that the knowledge that I was being spied on, my entire life was essentially exposed to the government that I was standing up against, I felt like they were slowing us down, and that they could also have access to our strategies and our efforts and stop us from advocating for our father or convince the people we were addressing not to act. And one example of the way that we noticed that the spyware was truly affecting the work of my father's lawyers is that at one point we learned that my father had been tortured, and we were able to get the testimony, the details of the way he was being mistreated. And we were going to publish those findings and to share with the world so that they could act and bring him home quickly. But, and my lawyers in Europe had not yet contacted my Rwandan lawyers, my father's Rwandan lawyers. But the goal was for the Rwandan lawyers to bring an affidavit to the prison so that my father could sign it, and then we could then release this information. But as soon as we hadn't yet contacted the Rwandan lawyers about the affidavit, but the next time they went to the prison authorities searched through all their things, and they were asking for the paper that my father was supposed to sign. And the lawyer said, "What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about." So this means that we were being listened to. We were being spied on, and the findings with Pegasus demonstrated the extent to which it affected the privacy of my father's legal team and the efforts to release him. But just another example, which was also very shocking in the way that it affected our efforts, was that I had a meeting with the Belgian foreign minister, who my father is also a Belgian citizen, so we wanted support from the Belgian government to get him home. And the forensics analysis showed that the moment I walked into the minister's office until the moment I walked out, the spyware had been active. And so this, again, sent a chill down my bones to know that they had this much access to everything I was doing.
Yeah, maybe something to precise as well. It's about the use, how NSO customers are using the spyware. Our understanding is that it's not a H24 surveillance, but it's a very precise surveillance on opportunities they might understand if you have a meeting, like in your case, or even in your case as well. And they are activating the camera, the microphone, getting into some precise files, just maybe for 1 hour of research. And based on the forensic analysis that Amnesty International did provide you, you were having a clear understanding precisely about what the intelligence services were looking for, right?
Yes, it was very clear. The moments at which they decided to target the phone was just when I had important meetings. And
after that, so you learn about that. How is life after that moment when you learn that you have been targeted? How do you protect yourself against that kind of surveillance? How do you communicate with peoples and how safe you feel now?
So at first, I thought, well, I'm not shocked that the government of Rwanda, a dictatorship, would go to those extents. They already had my father in prison, and so now they had turned their gaze on me and my family. And so I thought, we have to continue. My dad is still in prison. We cannot allow them to frighten us and to silence us into not speaking out on behalf of my father. And then I learned of the power of this technology, and I was afraid to go anywhere on my own. I could not go to the shop down the street for a cafe. I felt like and at some point we knew that the government of Rwandan, agents of the government were following me on the streets in Brussels, and we had to get the police to support and to ensure our security. So I just was frightened to really do anything, and even using my phone, I couldn't anymore. I just was afraid, but I knew that if I stopped, they win, and I might never see my father again. And so I decided to continue along with my family, and we thought, maybe we can even trick them if we know that they're listening to us. Maybe we can send them on the wrong path. And however, I also started taking different measures. So I turn on and off my phone often, because I understand that turning on and off your phone reboots the system and gets rid of that specific infection. And for a while, when friends and family would come to my home, I would make them all put their phones in the microwave. So it became a routine that you walk into my house, you go to the microwave, and then you can do whatever you want. And so it certainly affected my feeling of safety, of security. Wherever I went, I felt like they could get to me as well. But I think it's important to expose them, and this is what happened, is by speaking out about this Pegasus incident. I was able to be invited to testify in the Congress, and I talked about the feeling of being spied on at a moment where my father was being tortured in a Rwandan prison, and that in of itself brought more attention from the US government, the Congress, that then acted faster to put pressure on Kagame's regime to release my father, along with the European Parliament and other organizations around the world who raised their voices as they also felt alarmed by the Pegasus spyware. I wasn't the only one spied on. It was all those officials I had been speaking to, all the journalists I had been speaking to, my entire family and friends. So by targeting me, they targeted a big community.
Yeah, this is precisely what is powerful in your testimony, that much of the people, I think, were not really so aware about how it is to be a victim of the spyware and how all your entourage, your personal environment is victimized as well because of that, and how traumatizing it is. Galina, you learned from another way that you were targeted, right? All start one day I think in September 23, when you receive an Apple notification, just a message on your device. Can you tell us how did you learn about that?
Late at night, I received message on my phone. I opened it, and it was message from Apple. Your iPhone was a target of state-organized attack. It was 4 pages message. I never ever received something like this. And I just made screenshots and sent it to our technical director, tech lead. And next morning, he called me in a very polite voice, very strange. He said, are you going to the office? I said, no, I want to work from home. He said, please come. When I came to the office, he made sign like this, and took all my gadgets, and just closed the door. And after 2 hours, he came to me and said that he had a conversation and expertise from organization Success Now and Citizen Lab, and my iPhone was infected with the Pegasus spyware. And maybe day after, they said precisely that my iPhone was infected at 10th of February, and for 26 days, they follow me every day. My iPhone was infected from 10th of February until 6th of March or something like this. And this time I realized that my iPhone was infected first when I visited Berlin, and I live in Latvia, and I have Latvian phone number. And it was day before the special closed meeting, secret meeting of Russian media managers of Media in Exile, and we had to discuss safety and security measures we should do to protect our journalists on the ground. So they infected my iPhone just before this closed session. So I was very much scared that I did something wrong. And it's my fault that I put on risk our reporters in Russia. And you know, we were labeled as undesirable organization, and every direct connection with us is a crime. You can spend from 4 to 6 years in prison just to work with us. So I was very much frustrated, and I thought that I did something wrong until the time when Access Now and Citizen Lab said that there is no defense. They just needed to know my number, and that's all.
Yeah, it's true that many victims told us about the feeling of guiltiness. I remember Khadija Ismailova in Azerbaijan, who have been infected as well from a long time, were explaining how guilty she felt about our relatives because she was thinking maybe she put them in danger just by talking with them. And that was your feeling too.
You know, actually, after some time I realized that I'm sorry I wear glasses, and I do not never ever use iPhone to do my job. I use laptop. I'm not so so the main treasure they could obtain, it was my contact list. Yes, I do not know names of our reporters in Russia. This is our security protocols, but I have huge contact list. So during 1 month, they could see everything I messaged or write something to, or they could use my iPhone as a microphone on these closed meetings with my Russian colleagues.
Do you think they were using the microphone during specifically those meetings?
Yes, yes. I think that was the main goal. I doubt that I was an essential target, but I took part in many meetings and closed meetings, and we were the initiators of developing special security and safety protocols for the reporters, so it seems to me that they were the target, not me.
And who are they? Because we were not aware about Russia having a license of Pegasus, but maybe they were subcontracting that or using proxies. So what is your opinion on that? Who might be behind that?
You know, unfortunately, all experts said that Pegasus spyware does not leave fingerprints. There is no direct information who is behind this attack. But there are some concerning signs. First, it was cross-border repressions, because I live in Latvia and my phone was infected while I was in Germany. Second, you know, Russia is not known consumer of Pegasus spyware, but Azerbaijan, Iran, and all these countries are. So maybe, but unfortunately, many European countries are consumers of Pegasus spyware. Latvia, Estonia, Germany, Netherlands, there are countries where we have our contributor writers, journalists, freelancers, so more or less it could be anybody of them.
Yeah, talking about all those states who are using the Pegasus spyware, Agnes, can you give us a broad picture of the different states? Before talking about the victims, let's talk about the state and the customers of the NSO company. Could you give us an idea about what kind of state, who are they, and where we are now with those states still using Pegasus? Oh, maybe you muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you, Laurent. It's a pleasure to be joining you all. My best regard to Karin and Galina as well. So the Pegasus release of the report, the many reports, I think was a real bombshell because it highlighted the extent of the scandal. At this point in time, there are at least 20 countries that have been where people have been targeted, and probably far more. We have found evidence of Pegasus in very different places, from El Salvador to people located in Europe. You know, so far we have at least 180 journalists who we believe have been targeted by Pegasus, and these are people who are investigating corruption, who are investigating massive human rights violations. We have conducted forensic tests on dozens of mobile phones of activists and journalists. You know, personally, I was very taken to discover that people close to Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi had been targeted before and after his murder on October 2018. We know that his fiancée, Hatice Cengiz, had been targeted just 4 days after his murder. We know that his wife, Anan Elat, was also targeted between September 2017 and April 2018. One of the most in-depth investigation we targeted was in El Salvador, where we believe that 22 journalists were targeted. They all worked for El Faro, an independent publication. And following that release, El Faro has moved its operation to Costa Rica, because they cannot continue operating in El Salvador. We found evidence of the use of Pegasus in India. We documented how Siddharth Varadarajan had been targeted. In fact, he was here at the festival in last year, I believe, and yet in December, we confirmed that he also had been once again targeted with Pegasus. So the threat of Pegasus, in spite of the reporting, is not diminishing. We still find evidence of the spyware being used post-report. We know that spywares have many shapes, not just Pegasus. Last week, Apple sent threat notification to users of iPhones in 92 countries last week, and we also published another report on a different kind of spyware called the Predator files, which is developed in the European Union, and it's sold from the European Union by the Intel-XA Alliance. And there too, we found a very broad use of the Predator, and that just one operator, one country, could target individuals globally. So it's scary, it's hope-ferreting. After Pegasus, we should have been able to expect that governments rose to the challenge of regulating a weapon that is so indiscriminate and yet extremely powerful in its impact. Powerful on individuals, powerful on societies, powerful on even peace and security. But nothing of that sort has happened, or at least nothing commensurate with the challenges that Pegasus and similar spywares represent.
And you mentioned some countries, or like Azerbaijan or Mexico, are known to use Pegasus, but even within the EU, there are some members of the EU who were at least in the past using Pegasus, such as Hungary or Poland, even Germany. So what is your vision and what are your thoughts on how you could be a EU state member and using that kind of spyware that is really not regulated at all?
Sure. You cannot, sadly, expect the European Union to be leading on the regulation of the spywares at the moment. There is a lot of demands, including from Amnesty International, for the EU to take its role. But what we are witnessing is, I will say, a complicity between governments and the industry to control a technology that is in many ways revolutionary, that has enormous implication, and no one is prepared to stop it because everyone is benefiting from it. It is a reality. It's either financial or strategic benefit. So to give you some examples, within the EU, legislative effort like the due diligence directive, which was adopted in December, so it is meant to curtail or to regulate, from a human rights standpoint, the activities of companies, including when they operate abroad. So that's great. It was I think, a very important step, that due diligence directive. But when you look at it carefully, you realize that there are loopholes. And one of the loopholes is the spyware industry. So the spywares and the industry that produce and sell it is not concerned by the due diligence directive, which means that they do not have to apply a human rights due diligence regarding who they sell their spywares to. So I think this is very telling as to where the European Union and governments around the world are on spywares. Another example from the European Union is the so-called European Media Freedom Act, which was just adopted in March 2024, and it will come to force in 2025. And I mean, improbably, single member state fought to include wording that would allow spyware against journalists in so-called national security cases, setting a very dangerous precedent, especially because we know how elastic the definition of national security is, including in Europe. So what you are witnessing right now is what we need to realize as activists and as journalists is that spyware are one of the leading elements, I will say, indicators of the restructuring of the international system, both political and economic. It is one of the drivers of the technological revolution, or a reflection of that revolution. It is central to the geostrategic realignment at global level, and nobody is prepared to regulate it because they all want to have an edge over the others. So the journalists, we, Amnesty International, have a lead role to play. We must, of course, continue to demand regulations and highlight what those spywares does to people. But we must also be super astute in the way we protect ourselves, and we must be super good at building our own capacity to identify the spyware.
And a last question about regulation. So we are 3 years, almost 3 years after the Pegasus Project revelation. The US, I think a few months after the revelation, the US authorities were blacklisting NSO. In Europe, they were setting up a Pegasus committee, an investigative committee. They were doing a lot of hearings. I think there were not a lot of transparency or accountability from EU state members on that. And as you say, there are still so many notifications from Apple, even in the past week, so many states are still using that. So is there any single mechanism that does exist in the world on this planet to protect the citizen, or as it was told to you, Galina, there is nothing and we have no way to defend ourselves against that?
Absolutely right. Taken. I think the US led that process by imposing sanctions on notorious spyware vendors like NSO. They also did that, impose sanction on Intelexa. 17 countries have come together to counter the proliferation and misuse of commercial spyware. There are guiding principles on the government use of surveillance technology. This month, so I think in March or April, in Poland, the government has alerted previous victims of Pegasus of their targeting. So that's all positive. It's far from being sufficient. We know from our own research, from what we found with predators, which came 2 years after Pegasus, that any steps taken since Pegasus has not stopped predators. In fact, predators is a European invention. It's, so there is a full lack of accountability and transparency, which is contributing to impunity. None of the investigations thus far have delivered anything on Pegasus. Last year, again looking at Europe, there was a committee of inquiry into Pegasus and similar spyware. And that committee called for urgent actions and recommendations. So that's great, significant and welcome steps, but the recommendations have not been implemented. And the committee itself concluded that neither the state, nor the council, nor the commission seem to be at all interested, I quote, in maximizing their effort to fully investigate the spyware abuse, thus knowingly protecting human governments which violate human rights within and outside the Union. They found that, that committee found that the NSO Group had sold spyware or other surveillance products to 14 countries in the European Union. So, sadly, places such as the European community that should lead the way on regulation is not rising to the challenge. In fact, it was recently described as the Wild West of spyware. What are we demanding? I think the only thing that can be done at the moment is really a moratorium on the sale, transfer, export, and use of spyware until such time where there is an adequate system of human rights safeguard. Code of conduct won't work. It's a good step, but it's not sufficient. And we have seen that since 2021, the measures taken are not delivering what is required. Therefore, they are not working. Until they work, there must be a moratorium, because the impact of spyware is enormous, and I think we need to insist on that. We've identified, we've heard the testimony from Karina and Galina. We need to understand the effect that the spyware has on investigation. We need to understand the impact on society at large, because those investigations conducted by journalists, the work done by human rights defenders must be protected at all costs.
Thank you, Agnes. The national security reasons is always the reason used by states to explain that they don't have any kind of answer, they don't have to be transparent for national security reasons. For most of those countries, that's always the same narrative. It prevents us, even us as journalists, to get answers. In your case as well, Rwanda, I guess, is of course explaining for security reasons. They maybe had to surveil you. Many reports now down and published about Rwanda that is seen as a model in Africa. Maybe you can give us another picture of the country that is also well known to track their own dissidents or opponents, as your father. Can you give us another picture maybe?
Yes, I often hear this about Rwanda. They tell me that Rwanda is a model for the rest of Africa, that it's the Switzerland of Africa, that the streets are clean. The reality is that it's a dictatorship. It's a brutal dictatorship that is not afraid to kidnap people across international borders, to go after daughters who are advocating for their father with spyware technology, to intimidate people wherever they are. Even in Rwanda, there is no freedom of expression, there is no political space, freedom to participate in the political space. And what I like to say as an example, imagine you walk into a house where everything is clean, and the owner of the house offers you a cup of tea, and you look around and you think it's really clean, but there's a closed door in that house, and you see blood going underneath the door, you hear screams behind the door, but you keep drinking your tea and you say, it's clean. That's what's happening in Rwanda. People are pretending not to know the sufferance of our people. And that's why we have to continue to speak up on behalf of everyone who's been silenced and victimized by the regime, and not pretend that because it's a clean country, that everything is perfect. It's not. And we have to continue to expose this injustice.
And that kind of spyware is a perfect tool for that kind of dictators to track and to export their terror abroad and to track their dissidents. Galina, you do work in exile. I would like you to tell us a little bit how it is to be a Russian journalist leading a Russian newspapers from exile, knowing that you have been targeted by Pegasus. How are you doing your job in your daily life with you and your colleagues? How do you communicate with your sources? How you can still continue your work? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Thank you for this question, but unfortunately I could not answer absolutely frankly, because we have very strict protocols of safety and security. The only thing I can say that now we're under enormous constant attacks from Russian authorities. Our infrastructure is under attack. Now these days we're under DDoS attack, and the traffic is 3,000% bigger than previously. So we're under constant attacks, and we are working very hard to reach our audience inside Russia, because what I have to say, that there are millions of Russian readers who desperately need independent information, and please do not take them as a Putin's friends. Many of them, most of them, should be considered like hostages of Putin's regime. So we're working in a very toxic environment, and the main thought I want to tell you that many of journalists in exile, when they reached European Union, they decided that they are safe. It's not. We are not safe. Our journalist was poisoned in Germany last autumn. Some activists were poisoned in Lithuania last year. So we are not safe here, but we rely on European Union regulation and government. But unfortunately, we know for sure that Pegasus spyware could be established only by governmental structures. So we definitely need to regulate and to restrict the usage of the Pegasus spyware at least. And my second thought is that big tech are not the same in the case of Pegasus. For example, Apple at least sent you a notification. Google, never. So if you have iPhone, more or less, you will be notified. If you have Android, Google never ever admit the usage or that your phone was infected. So I raised alarm last year in European Parliament, in OSCE. Guys, you have to speed up your efforts to regulate, because it's not about myself, it's not even about journalists in exile, it's about all Europeans. You know, Predator was used in Greece against members of government. So it's all about the political opponents, the journalists, investigators, political activists. Anybody is under threat. Everybody is under threat. Please do something in a speedy way.
Thank you so much. We have 6 minutes to take some questions. There are some microphone here. Thank you for raising your hand. A microphone is, I think, going to you. And yeah, please ask your question.
Yeah, it's working. Actually, I don't want to ask a question. I just want to add that if you use an iPhone, please enable lockdown mode. It will most likely prevent an infection of Pegasus or Predator malware. And if you use Android, consider getting a Google Pixel and install Graphene OS on it. It most likely prevent an infection as well. That's all.
Thank you for the tip. That's nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. And any other question? Yes, please.
Thank you for important panel. I'm an Azerbaijani journalist in exile. We have 1,000 victims from Azerbaijan, which is because Amnesty International and Forbidden Stories published 1,000 victims, like this huge statistics, even in huge India, not many victims as like in a small Azerbaijan with 10 million population. But unfortunately, civil society and journalist community able to identify only 65 individuals. It means for more than 900 individuals not identified, and many of our colleagues have a concern for even from the civil society or media community who have access to all of this data is lack of transparency, because we I'm asked several times, like colleagues from Forbidden Stories and from Amnesty International personally, Agnes Kalmarfo, guys, could you share this data with us? We can contribute. We can also try to track this list and to look to more victims and maybe provide them more legal assistance, because only 25 persons apply for European Court for Human Rights. Not each victims want to do actions against government, but if we, for example, we have more access to such kind of important data, which is leaked by someone from whistleblower from NSO Group, maybe right now we have more strategic litigation case in European Court for Human Rights. How is possible to do identify more victims? Like, because like what we saw is thousands of people, but only famous cases going on the radar of international community. Many unknown people even don't know what they are secretly under surveillance. Thank you.
So Amnesty Tech and Citizen Lab are doing a lot of good work in supporting people who believe they've been infected with the Pegasus spyware. So I would recommend to reach out to those two organizations, and on their websites there are instructions on how to work with them even remotely, for them to look into your phone and conduct the forensics analysis. And by doing this step, you become also part of their database, and they continue not only to work with you, but to connect with other victims so that they can support them as well. So I would recommend that you contact them, and by being part of their network, you are already supported by a very strong community of advocates.
One more question, one last question. Yes, with the yellow vest. Here, the mic to the yellow vest. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for what you told us. I was wondering, I was going back to what Galina said about Apple that notifies and Google that doesn't. And I'm wondering, are we really sure that this is a good sign, a good message? I mean, if I tend to think that Apple knows and is involved, Google doesn't. And if you make a search in Google, there are a lot of good suggestions to try to limitate this Pegasus stuff. So I'm really wondering if Apple knows, is it good that he knows who needs to be notified? Isn't it a kind of involvement, knowing who has been infected?
Well,
Thanks. Maybe too complotist, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, but it seems to me it's all about the reputation of technology, of the IT companies. If you are big tech and you have some holes in your software, for example, my iPhone was infected through pre-installed iMessages. I never ever in my life opened iMessages. Please raise your hand. Who use iMessages? Nobody. Yes? But you could not delete it from your iPhone. So if big tech companies admit the holes and warn you or ask you to reboot or ask you to update, so we have to trust them in this way, because that's their responsibility to provide safety on your gadgets. They are providing software, so they should update it and they should fix it if something bad happened. So it seems to me that it's all about reputation.
Thank you so much, Galina. It's time to end the conversation. Just a few tips following your tips as well. Lockdown mode for those who have an iPhone. It's extremely powerful and it does prevent. It does protect against such an attack. Separate personal and professional devices for those who are journalists here or human rights activists. You can as well use auto-delete disappearing messages. It's good sometimes to use a device without any SIM card as well. It's good to meet in person as well without any kind of device or with another microwave not far from here. And to run some forensic, and for that you can go to Agnes organization or to Citizen Lab. They are very powerful. Thank you so much, and I think we can thank you for thanks to the guests for that.